Good morning, and welcome to our webinar titled The History and Purpose of the FR 2644, hosted by the Statistics Department of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. This presentation is dated February 2nd, 2017, and is being recorded. It will be posted on our public website shortly after we conclude for future viewing. My name is Brian Bull, and I am the Statistics Reports Manager here at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. As a reminder, the opinions and views expressed through this webinar are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of the Board of Governors, the Federal Reserve System, or the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. We will be taking questions throughout the webinar to be answered at the conclusion of our presentation. To ask a question, please email us at financialreports@dal.frb.org. That's financialreports@dal.frb.org. Please send your questions as you think of them during the presentation. Our speakers today will be two members of our FR 2644 reviewing team, James Carroll and Aaron Kessler. Again, welcome to our first webinar, and I'll turn it over to James to get things started.
Thank you, Brian, for the introduction. Before we get started, I would like to thank you for joining us and taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us this morning. I am James Carroll, the team lead for Bank Credit Division, and with me is Aaron Kessler. Aaron is a senior statistics analyst with the credit team. Aaron has been with us for several years, and I'm sure many of you have had the pleasure of working with her. We, along with the other members of Bank Credit, are excited to share this information with you today. Here is the roadmap for today's webinar. First, we will cover a brief history of the FR 2644 report. We will discuss how the report originated, how the data was used when the report was first created, and its purpose. Next, we will explore the roles of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, as well as the role of the Board of Governors. We will cover what the Federal Reserve and the Board does with the data that we receive from you today. We will also cover the H8 statistical release and what that release involves. Lastly, we will cover information regarding historical changes to the report, as well as how your institution can help us meet our goals. Now that we have covered the agenda, let's get into the webinar. We're going to start off traveling back 100 years ago. We are in 1917 and in the middle of World War I. The Board of Governors and those responsible for financing the war effort needed a clear view of the current financial situation. The FR 416 report, Weekly Condition Report of Member Banks and Lending Cities, was created to fulfill this need. The Board of Governors looked over the U.S. map and identified the 96 cities that were deemed important, and the 600 banks within these cities that needed to file the FR 416. These 96 cities were determined based on the most populous metropolitan areas of the time. During the early days of the report, only the following 7 line items were collected. Even though the data was collected at the Reserve Bank, only aggregate data was sent to the Board of Governors. Over the years, in response to changes in economic and banking conditions, regulation, and economic policies, there have been several changes to the report. In essence of time, let's jump into the future to 2008-2009. We are currently in the midst of the worst credit crisis in recent memories. This crisis will eventually become known as the Great Recession. Every day, there was new information about a failed institution and or liquidity sources freezing. We are at a time where we need high-frequency information regarding the state and health of the U.S. economy. The Board of Governors soon recognized the need for the greater level of detail in the assets and liabilities of our banks. Therefore, the Board looked to 3 weekly reports, the FR 2644, FR 2069, and FR 2416, that collected this information. The FR 2644 Weekly Report of Assets collected only selected assets for small banks. The FR 2069 weekly report of assets and liabilities for large U.S. branches and agencies of foreign banks, and the FR 2416 collected assets and liabilities for large banks. On July 1st, 2009, these three reports were consolidated into one report and retained the name FR 2644, Weekly Report of Selected Assets and Liabilities of Domestically Chartered Commercial Banks and U.S. branches and agencies of foreign banks. The Board of Governors recognized the need for timely banking data in the areas of monetary policy and banking supervision and regulation, coupled with the needs for significant reduction in reporting burden. In order to accomplish this, the Board consolidated these three reports into a single series, which allowed for the simplification of how both large and small domestically chartered commercial banks, plus the U.S. branches and agencies of foreign banks, reported this report. Next, this increased the scope in analyzing weekly reported bank balance sheet data. Additionally, it allowed for this family of reports to adapt the fair value reporting method by including loans and securities held in trading account in the appropriate categories. The report can now provide information on securities by issuer and type rather than just account type, such as an investment versus a trading account. This also allows for more data detailed on small, domestically chartered banks and U.S. branches and agencies of foreign banks. Lastly, the consolidation deleted 10 data items that were no longer needed on a weekly basis. Now that we have covered the history of the FR 2644, and before we get into the purpose, there's one question that comes to mind, and that question is, what is bank credit? Bank credit is the aggregate credit available to borrowers in the U.S. This information is used to monitor lending and borrowing activities of banks. Areas of interest in particular are asset quality and liquidity, as mentioned in earlier slides. The term bank credit will come up throughout the presentation. Since we have covered the history of the FR 2644 report and what bank credit is, let's move on to the purpose of the FR 2644 report. There are several reasons why we collect this report. I'm going to cover 5 major key points for the collection of this data. First, this report is used in the construction of estimates of bank credit for the U.S. banking industry. This information allows the Board of Governors to understand and realize what is happening in the U.S. regarding the extension of credit and to what extent this is occurring. Next, this is the only high-frequency data source that captures information regarding credit and borrowing activity to analyze banking and monetary development. In a world of high-paced and constant changes, we need accurate data just as fast. Because of this report, we are able to capture data and discuss with our institutions the effects of economic changes. This is information that is extremely helpful and that we would not catch between quarters without the submission of the weekly FR 2644 report. The Board uses this data and anecdotal information from our banks in order to make well-informed decisions on economic and monetary policies. Examples that come to mind are World War I and the Great Recession that were mentioned earlier. Because of the frequency of the data, it also helps identify monthly as well as quarterly patterns. The weekly collection of the FR 2644 allows for us to see trends occurring between months and quarters that the call report could not possibly capture due to its quarterly frequency. Again, the weekly frequency allows us to more closely find out when a business event occurs and when it concludes. The FR 2644 data provides input to the H8 statistical release. This statistical release will be covered in more detail by Aaron. In essence, this release provides an estimated weekly aggregate balance sheet for all commercial banks in the United States, small or large, as well as a balance sheet for branches and agencies of foreign banks. Lastly, it provides information that can be used by the Federal Open Market Committee. Let's take a look at the recent examples of this in action. In this slide, we can see an example of the minutes released by the FOMC. As you may be aware, the FOMC is the monetary policy making body of the Federal Reserve System. This committee meets 8 times a year, approximately every 6 weeks, with the sole purpose of conducting monetary policy. As you can see on this slide, here is an excerpt from the December 2016 FOMC meeting. I'll highlight certain key points to focus on during this slide. The first section that I would like to highlight is, although gross issuance of corporate bonds slowed notably in October and November from the brisk pace in the third quarter. The second section that I would like to highlight is the average rate of growth of CRE loans at banks continued to be strong in October and November. I wanted to draw your attention to these 2 points because they specifically state these events occurred in October and November, which indicate the use of the FR 2644 data. Both events occurred between call report quarter end, and the FR 2644 allows for economists to see exactly when events occurred and to what capacity. Along with other parts in the FOMC meeting minutes, you can see how the FR 2644 data, as well as your data remarks, are useful to help determine what is occurring in the U.S. economy. Thanks to your weekly remarks, we can provide information to the board that can help them determine if this growth is continuing, accelerating at a faster pace, or the opposite, decelerating. This FOMC meeting minutes is a great example of valuable uses of the FR 2644 data. We have covered the history and purpose. Let's now look at the roles of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas and the Board of Governors. The Federal Reserve Bank's role is to assist the board and therefore the FOMC in conducting their job. To that end, we do the following. Each analyst is responsible with reviewing, checking for accuracy, and analyzing each of our 2644 reporters' data. Once we have verified that the data is accurate, we check for the trends in the data fluctuations to see if this is a seasonal change or if this is a reoccurring pattern in order to help us explain the data changes to the board. We are always interested in understanding data anomalies, and to that end, when we ask a question, we are seeking to find out the business reason behind the fluctuation in order for us to better understand what is occurring in our region. In order to further ensure the accuracy of the FR 2644 data, we compare the 2644 data to your last filed call report. We do this to ensure reporting consistencies across the 2 reports. This is accomplished through inter-series edits once a quarter. When asking questions about inter-series edits, we understand that there can be legitimate differences between the FR 2644 and the call report. This can be due to timing differences between the 2 reports, as well as possible differences as how the data is collected on these reports. Regardless of the reason for the difference, as you were able to see from the FOMC excerpt, it is important for us to understand why the data is different. Last but not least is to provide information to the Board of Governors. We provide data explanations to the board for the institutions in our district. This can help the board compare business activities in our district and see if this is a reoccurring pattern in other parts of the system. Your data and your data narratives directly help the board make better policy-making decisions. The Board of Governors has multiple roles when it comes to the FR 2644. Here are 3 of their main objectives. First, they analyze the data from each district. They are looking at the lending conditions and credit flows. They also look at the supply of loans, such as the standard and terms of loans. Do the banks have plenty of capital and the capacity to lend? They also look at the demand for loans. Is it strong or weak demand, which in turn leads to growth or retraction within the U.S. economy? The Board of Governors is interested in knowing who is borrowing. Are these loans by individuals, large corporations, small businesses, or perhaps another type of borrower? Knowing this helps the Board of Governors see the health of the banking industry. The Board of Governors reviews the asset quality and capital adequacy liquidity of our institution. This allows the Board of Governors to make accurate decisions with confidence in our ever-changing world. If Fed analysts start to notice a trend, we could identify those trends and understand the underlying cause. Then the Board of Governors could determine if it is a specific district or region of the U.S., or is this going to happen across the system, and they can step in and take the appropriate actions as necessary to put us in a successful position. Another role of the Board of Governors is to perform the calculations to create an estimate of the banking industry. The board has economic models that they use to understand where the U.S. economy is at any point in time. This allows them to see any anomalies early on and seek out understanding of what is occurring. Lastly, the board aggregates the FR 2644 data in order to publish the weekly H8 statistical release. Aaron will now continue this presentation and will further explain the H8 statistical release.
Thank you, James. As James mentioned, I am going to talk about some of the uses of the FR 2644 data. The assets and liabilities of commercial banks in the United States, or the H8, is the statistical release created by the Board of Governors using the FR 2644 data. It is published on the Board of Governors website every Friday afternoon, typically by 3:15 p.m. Central Time, 9 days after the as-of date for the report. It is an estimated aggregate balance sheet for all commercial banks in the U.S. So while the numbers that are published are a representation of the entire U.S. banking industry, they are not exact data, as the FR 2644 report is not collected for every commercial bank in the U.S. There is a balance sheet for all commercial banks in the U.S., but there are also many other balance sheets in the data release for different groups of bank types. There are balance sheets for only the domestically chartered commercial banks in the U.S., for large domestically chartered commercial banks in the U.S., for small domestically chartered commercial banks in the U.S., and for foreign-related institutions in the U.S. All of these groups have two balance sheets, one that is seasonally adjusted and one that is not. The H8 statistical release is easily accessible on the Board of Governors website and can be downloaded in packages. There is also a graphing tool on the website that can provide quick graphs on any part of the data that you want more information about. Because the H8 is created using the data collected on the FR 2644 report, it is the only high-frequency statistical release with detailed information on the state of credit across the banking industry. So not only is the FR 2644 an important source of data for our researchers and policymakers, it is also an important source of information for the public on the state of the U.S. banking industry. Now that we know the basic structure of the H8 statistical release, let's take a look at how the data can be used to gain insight on the U.S. banking industry. This is a graph of data taken from the H8 on total bank credit for all commercial banks in the United States in millions of dollars from 2007 to 2016. The shaded bar represents the Great Recession. Building on the definition of bank credit that James provided earlier, this graph shows the sum of all securities and all loans and leases included in bank credit. For the purposes of the FR 2644 report, this includes U.S. Treasury and agency securities, line items 2A1 and 2A2, other securities, line items 2B1 and 2B2, commercial and industrial loans, line item 4C, all real estate loans, line items 4A1 through 4A5, consumer loans, line items 4D1 through 4D3, and other loans and leases, line items 3B, 4E, and 4F. This graph shows an increase in bank credit leading up to the recession, a decrease in bank credit as a result of the recession, and an increase in bank credit during the recovery. We are going to take a closer look at bank credit in the U.S. during the Great Recession to show the importance of this high-frequency data. This graph is showing the same bank credit for all commercial banks in the U.S., only it is looking specifically at December 2007 through June 2009. The high-frequency data in this case allows us to narrow down the large spike in bank credit during the Great Recession to the exact week the increase occurred. We can see here that on the FR 2644 report ending on October 1st, 2008, bank credit for all commercial banks in the U.S. increased $307 billion. If we dig deeper into the more specific balance sheets on the H8, we see that the increase occurred specifically in domestically chartered large commercial banks. At this time, policymakers were keeping a very close eye on the banking industry and were probably asking what caused this very large increase in bank credit. On September 26, 2008, a large commercial bank acquired approximately $270 billion of assets and liabilities from a large non-commercial bank. This means the amount of bank credit available for all commercial banks in the U.S. increased significantly on the FR 2644 report that captured this day. Very valuable information about this acquisition was captured by the data collected on the FR 2644. The H8 was able to publish detailed information about the major asset and liability items that were affected by the acquisition. For example, there were significant increases in real estate loans for commercial banks in the U.S. due to the acquisition. In a time when information about the U.S. banking industry was crucial, policymakers were able to see the immediate effect of this acquisition on the commercial banking industry. Without this high-frequency report, policymakers would have been forced to wait until call report information was finalized to understand the effects of a major change such as this acquisition on our economy. The valuable insight gained from data collected on the FR 2644 is used by policymakers and researchers to monitor the banking industry. Because of the data's importance, the Board of Governors periodically assesses gaps that exist in the data based on insights gained from the report in the current banking environment. This may lead to changes in the report form aimed to fill any gaps that are found. Let's take a look at a recent example. A Federal Register notice was published in September 2014 informing the public of proposed changes to the FR 2644 report form. The proposed changes would subdivide several loan categories, add 2 memoranda items, and delete several items that were not providing useful information. One of the main focuses of the proposal was to change the way data on commercial real estate loans was collected, as seen in this screenshot of part of the Federal Register. The notice explains that during the crisis and the subsequent recovery, there was a need to track commercial real estate loans as they declined during the crisis and then began to recover in 2012. But while the FR 2644 report collected information on total commercial real estate loans, there was a need for data on the behavior of specific kinds of commercial real estate loans to understand how different commercial real estate loan segments were behaving. Because of this, the Board of Governors proposed changes to the FR 2644 report in the aftermath of the crisis to adjust for the need for more timely and more detailed commercial real estate loan data. If you would like more information on Federal Register notices, there is a link to the website at the end of this presentation. The proposal was approved, and as many of you may remember, there were some major changes to the FR 2644 report form starting with the January 7, 2015 report. The new report subdivided commercial real estate loans, consumer loans, and other loans to collect information on smaller loan segments within each loan category. In addition, memoranda items were added to collect more information on available for sale securities and small business loans. Several line items were also eliminated from the report in order to reduce reporter burden, as they were deemed to add little to no value to the data collection. These changes increased the number of items reported on the FR 2644 to 33 items, a net increase of 3 data items. This is a graph of aggregate commercial real estate loans for all commercial banks in the U.S. from 2007 to 2016. Once again, the shaded portion of the graph represents the Great Recession. We can see here that commercial real estate loans were increasing up until about 2009, when they started decreasing at a pretty quick rate. They did not really begin to recover until about 2012, and they have been increasing pretty rapidly since then. But as the Federal Register notice explained, this graph does not provide any information detailing how different commercial real estate loan segments are distributed within this overall category. More detailed information on commercial real estate loan segments would allow us to analyze which individual segments are the driving forces behind the recovery of commercial real estate loans and which segments may be struggling more to recover. Because of the report change in 2015, we now have valuable information on the different loan segments that are driving the commercial real estate loan recovery. Here, we have graphed the new broken down commercial real estate line items to try to understand the makeup of the commercial real estate loan recovery. This graph shows how each segment of commercial real estate loans collected on the FR 2644 since January 7, 2015 has behaved for all commercial banks. The graph uses indexed values, as the trends behind each segment provide more valuable information than the actual dollar size of each category. As you can see, while all 4 segments have increased over the past 2 years, loans secured by multifamily properties and loans secured by construction and land development have increased at a quicker rate than loans secured by non-farm, non-residential properties and loans secured by farmland. This information is of particular interest as loans secured by construction are generally considered the most risky type of commercial real estate loan. The breakdown of commercial real estate loan segments has allowed researchers and policymakers to take a closer look at the driving forces behind the commercial real estate loan increase over the past few years, and will allow them to continue to monitor commercial real estate loans closely in the future. This is just one example of how the data and insight gained from the FR 2644 report shapes the evolution of the report in the future. The report will continue to change based on the needs of researchers and policymakers due to events throughout the banking industry. Now that we have discussed some examples of the importance of the data collected on the FR 2644 report, let's talk about what you can do to help us ensure the data will continue to be useful. First and most importantly, providing us with accurate and timely data allows us to confidently pass the data on to the Board of Governors within their timeline. It will also keep us from having to contact you frequently asking for revised reports. Second, providing us with information on large data fluctuations at your institution during the reporting week gives us qualitative information to pass on to the Board of Governors. If you provide us with explanations as you submit the report, once again, it will keep us from having to send questions about the data to your institution. Lastly, providing information on the business decisions behind movements on the report is highly valuable. In order to get a more complete picture of the U.S. banking industry as a whole, it is important for the Board of Governors to understand the business decisions behind movements in the industry. We appreciate any and all information you are willing to provide us. In the next few slides, we will talk more specifically about the type of information that provides valuable insights into your institution's data. When we receive your fluctuation explanations, what exactly are we looking for? First, the cause of the fluctuation. For example, was a new loan funded, or maybe securities were sold? An important distinction to think about when sending us explanations is the difference between events such as purchases and sales and originations and paydowns. For example, it is valuable for us to know if your institution experienced an increase in construction loans because you purchased a loan from another institution or because you originated a new loan for a customer. In the case of an origination, new credit is being added to the system, where in the event of a purchase, credit is simply moving from one source to another. We also like to know transaction level details. For example, who is the counterparty, or what kind of other consumer loan was funded. Transaction details provide more information about the kinds of relationships that exist within the U.S. banking industry. Lastly, specific dates and amounts are very valuable. Sending us exact dates and amounts related to the fluctuation provides us with additional details that we cannot deduce simply from looking at your report. I know I have discussed a lot of information about ways you can contribute important qualitative information to your FR 2644 report. Now, I am going to go through a few examples that will be helpful when deciding what kind of information to send us. Here is our first example. On your FR 2644 report for November 9, 2016, loans secured by non-farm, non-residential properties increased $23 million from the previous week's report. First, let's talk about an explanation that would not provide very useful insight to us. We made some new loans during the week. By looking at your data, we can deduce that new loans were made. This explanation does not give us qualitative information or context to what we can already see in the data. But here is an explanation that does provide qualitative insight to the data. A loan for $20 million was moved from a construction loan to a permanent non-farm, non-residential loan on November 4th, 2016 due to the completion of the construction phase of a new hospital. This explanation tells us that the cause of the fluctuation was the reclassification of a loan from construction to permanent financing. It provides us with the transaction detail that the loan is funding a hospital, and it also gives us the amount of the loan and the date the reclassification took place. We gain a lot of very valuable information from this explanation that we can pass on to the Board of Governors. Here is our second example involving total deposits. Total deposits on the November 9, 2016 FR 2644 report increased $680 million from the previous report. The increase is due to increases in deposits, is our unhelpful explanation. This does not provide us with any detailed reason behind the fluctuation, any transaction details, or any amounts or dates. Instead, here is an explanation that does give us detailed information. The increase of $680 million is due to $555 million in payroll deposits that were received in personal checking and personal savings accounts, a $10 million public time deposit, and a $115 million increase in CDARS. Note the corresponding increase in cash and due from balances, line 1, and large time deposits, line 8A. This explanation provides us with the cause of the significant increase in total deposits, as well as transaction details on the kinds of deposits and the amount of each deposit causing the increase. It also creates relationships between the item of focus and other items on the report. Once again, this qualitative information provides very important context to the fluctuation in question. Our last example is something we do not see too often on the report, but we want to emphasize the importance of the information we can gain from this situation. In this example, mortgage-backed securities on the November 9, 2016 FR 2644 report decreased $13 million from the previous week. Similar to the first two examples, the explanation, the decrease is due to the sale of securities, does not provide us with helpful contextual information. However, this explanation provides valuable information that we may not have without this institution remark. The decrease of $13 million is due to the sale of all our mortgage-backed securities on November 4, 2016, in preparation to merge with ABC Bank effective December 12, 2016. Not only does this explanation provide us with the cause and business decision behind the fluctuation, but it also gives us important information about an upcoming structure change at your institution. Now we know to look for other signs of a merger in your future reports. It also allows us to make preparations in our systems for the upcoming structure change involving your institution. We have looked at 3 examples of explanations that provide important qualitative insight into your data. We ask that you send these kinds of explanations to us when you see something on the report that you think is noteworthy. Some examples are when you see an abnormal fluctuation on a particular line item, a trend change on one or many line items, or a shift in your business line that can be seen in the data. If you have data items that you know experienced a noteworthy change from the previous week, we would appreciate it if you would send an email to your analyst with an explanation for the movement in that item along with the submission of your report. This will decrease the number of questions that we will send to your institution each week. If you are unsure of who your analyst is, our contact information is listed at the end of this presentation. Feel free to reach out to any one of us and we can send you to the correct person. Since we've gone into detail about the history and purpose of the report, as a reminder, the FR 2644 report is the only high-frequency collection of bank credit data. This makes the data collected on the report very valuable. The high frequency and level of detail on the report makes it a very important tool in assessing the health of the U.S. banking industry as a whole. In addition, because of its importance, the report will change based on the current economic conditions to be sure it is collecting the most valuable information. Finally, The data and associated contextual information that you send us play an important role in preparing policymakers to make decisions. Your participation in this report is important to the U.S. banking industry, and we appreciate your help in ensuring the Board of Governors has accurate and informative data on a weekly basis. Listed here are the analysts that currently process the FR 2644 report at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. Please feel free to reach out to any one of us with questions or concerns. Lastly, here is a list of resources that we think will be helpful to you. Please let us know if you have any questions about any of these links.
Thank you, Erin and James. We will now move to the question and answer portion of our presentation. As a reminder, you can email your questions regarding this presentation or the 2644 in general to financialreports@dal.frb.org. That's financialreports@dal.frb.org. We'll pause for just a moment to compile our question list. Our first question is, do I need to let you know when and why I send revisions to the report that you have not requested?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, please. This is very helpful as the board looks to us for the reasons as to why the data was revised and by what amount. And if you can be proactive, then we will be less likely to get a call or email asking questions from us about why the data was revised and the reason behind it.
Thanks, James. The second question we received is this. With changes coming up to how time deposits are reported on the March call report, will these changes affect how the FR 2644 report collects this information?
Thank you. Unfortunately, at this time, there are no plans to change the FR 2644 report to mirror the changes made to the call report. With this in mind, there is still a place on your call report that you can obtain the information you need for total time deposits of $100,000 or greater. If you look at Schedule RCE, Deposit Liabilities, and the Memoranda Items 2C and 2D can be summed to calculate 8A on the FR 2644 report. If you guys have any further questions about this, please feel free to reach out to us, and we will be happy to walk you through this.
Thanks, Erin. The third question we've got is this. I have been to the FR 2900 training held at FRB Dallas, and I was wondering if you provide similar training for the 2644 report.
Yes. Well, thank you, first of all, for attending the FR 2900 seminar. We are currently in the process of creating a series of webinars that will be similar to the FR 2900 seminar, and that will cover the different line items and what goes on certain line items and what doesn't go on line items. And if you look at our public website, we will keep you updated there as to when the dates of those webinars will be in the future.
Thanks, James. We'll hold for just a moment here and see if we get any additional questions in. All right, it looks like that's it for now. Thank you for your questions. As a reminder, you will receive an evaluation form by email to assess this webinar. Please take a couple minutes to fill out and return this evaluation either by fax or by email, both of which are to be described in the email being sent. Your feedback will help us to improve not only this webinar, but all of our ongoing outreach efforts. Please visit our public website at www.dallasfed.org/banking/reporting for future training and webinars, contact information, and information on the full range of reports that we collect and review. Thank you again for participating in the history and purpose of the FR 2644 webinar, and this concludes our presentation today.